Kedoshim tihiyu, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. I've been thinking about these words for many years, and I have to confess something, which is I have no idea what this means.
Know me.
I know me. The next verse tells us, Imo ve'aviv tira'u, revere your mother and father, but God has no parents. God does seem to keep Shabbat, which is the second clause of that verse, but idol worship comes next. And I don't think the Holy One is in danger of worshiping idols. So if this verse, Kedoshim Tihiyu, is a headline, a framework, then it would have been better if it read, I am holy, so worship me. Holiness is worthy of reverence, but you be holy because I am holy. Rashi notices that there are more words than necessary in our verse. Daber el kol adat b'nei Yisrael. So why not just say, speak to the children of Israel? Why the entire congregation of the children of Israel? The Kol Edah, he explains, teaches that this section was proclaimed in full assembly because most of the fundamental teachings of Torah are dependent on it. He bases his teaching on a midrash from Vayikra Rabbah, which claims that the reason all these specific things are listed afterward is because this is another version of the Ten Commandments. Because what it means to be a Jew practically, that there are specific things that we're supposed to do in the world that are about holiness. And I think that's true. I derive a great amount of holiness, a sense of holiness from observing the mitzvot. And Rashi reminds us that this section also follows the laws about sexual morality, and that makes some sense because the ethical choices that we make with our bodies are also part of what it means to be holy, notwithstanding maybe a verse or two in there that we might not adhere to or understand differently than it might have once been understood. Kadosh, you see, literally means distinctive, be different, be better than you might have been by following a better path. But fundamentally, I do not understand what it means when God says that for the people to be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy, because God is not us and we are not God. So if it is said, or if it rather said, aspire to be more holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy, that might make some sense to me. I, God, am the pinnacle of holiness. You are human beings who are created in flesh and blood with the capacity to do good and evil, to love and to hate, the capacity to use your bodies for creation and for destruction, your benefactors, your victims, maybe another, maybe yourselves. And I, God, am infinite and loving and complete, and so you should strive to be more holy. But it doesn't say strive to be more holy. Fundamentally, this passage, this section of Torah that scholars call the Holiness Code, opens with a paradox. I am holy, you should be holy. You are human, I am God. And the question that gets me completely confused is, what does it mean to be the thing that God is? How can we be what God is without being God? But maybe, just maybe, the answer derives from the word tselem. So we need to go back to Bereshit, to Genesis, where it says that when we're created in the image of God, in the likeness of God. Tselem Elohim. It doesn't say, Na'aseh Adam Kimotenu. Let us make human beings as us, like us, in the royal we. It says Kidmutenu, in our likeness, Bitsalmenu, in God's image. We are the Dumut of God. We're the Tselem of God. We're a projection of the divine. So maybe the point of holiness isn't to be God-like, but God-following. In other words, we share attributes with God, the behaviors of God. The way God is holy is the way we're meant to be holy. Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Hanina, says, what is the meaning of that which is written, Achrei Hashem Elohechem telechu, after the Lord your God you shall walk, from Deuteronomy? But is it possible, asks the Gemara in Masechet Sota, for a person to follow the divine presence? Hasn't it already been said elsewhere in Devarim, for the Lord your God is a devouring fire? If you walk with fire, guess what's going to happen? You'll get burned. But the response to this rhetorical question is beautiful. Ella lehalech achar midotav. Rather, walk after God's attributes. So that's what it means to walk after God. Imitatio Dei. And how do we walk in God's ways? We observe the mitzvot. We do like God does or did. And it's interesting that the mitzvot listed are not the mitzvot that we might think. Walking in God's ways means keeping kosher. Walking in God's ways means keeping Shabbos. Walking in God's ways means separating wool from linen. None of these things are mentioned in the Midrash. No, it actually says to walk in God's ways is to visit the sick, to care for the needy, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked. Walking in God's ways means burying the dead. Perhaps the problem is that we have a warped sense of what holiness can be. When we say kadosh, 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 what do? We kind of raise ourselves up on our toes, as if to reach a bit closer to heaven. But who says heaven is up? Who says God is up? Maybe we need the paradox. I am holy, you should be holy. You are human, I am God, to show that God has no monopoly on holiness, that the possibilities of holiness are expansive, just as God is capacious. I think about that story by Iyar Peretz, If Not Higher. You know that story? We often tell it around the High Holy Days. Reflecting on that story, I've come to understand that to be angelic is actually not to ascend to heaven. To be holy is not to be God. That our posture in prayer may remind us of God's presence, but our posture in life toward one another reminds us of our own godliness. You remember the story. In the days before Rosh Hashanah, during the time of Slichot, the Rebbe of Nemirov would disappear, and his disciples are convinced that the Rebbe has ascended to heaven. But one day this Litvak, this scoffer, shows up. And he hears about the Rebbe of Nemirov and the fanciful tales of his heavenly sojourns. You see, Litvaks are like the Snopes of the 19th century in Galicia. They're like the mythbusters of the Hasidim. And this particular Litvak determines to suss out the truth about the Nemirov Rebbe. And he follows him early in the morning as the Rebbe dresses like a Ukrainian peasant, wanders in the forest, and begins to chop down a tree. The Rebbe splits the logs into firewood and bundles them together with rope, all while the Litvak is watching. This guy's going to be exposed, thinks the Litvak. But then he watches the Rebbe, still dressed like a peasant, as he knocks on the door of a frail woman, a feeble old lady who has no money and is in danger of freezing during the cold Ukrainian autumn. And as the Rebbe stacks the wood in her fireplace, as he lights the fire and stokes the flames, the Litvak hears him chant the Slichot prayers. He's not ditching shul during the penitential season, he realizes. The Rebbe is, God forbid, not leading a double life as a Ukrainian peasant. He is approaching the very gates of heaven on the eve of Rosh Hashanah. So when the Litvak returns to Nemirov, he becomes a student of the Rebbe, so the story goes. And for years to come, whenever some other Chassid would speculate about the Rebbe of Nemirov, just before Rosh Hashanah, when he would disappear, that in fact he had ascended to heaven, the Litvak would not laugh and he wouldn't scoff, but would mumble quietly, if not higher. Rosh Hashanah is pretty far away, but that doesn't matter because this isn't a Rosh Hashanah story. It's a Kedoshim Tihiyu story. What does it mean to be holy? Because God is holy. It is to recognize that to be fully human means that if we have to choose between reciting empty words from a book and providing firewood for someone who is freezing, there is a holier choice. It means that when we're in shul, and to be clear, we should come to shul. The words we recite, and we should recite them, should not be empty. They should not only bring us joy or be a container for our sorrow either. They should be animating, transformative even. God isn't up per se. God is, if we need a metaphor, God maybe is walking before us or beside us, guiding us. Gam ki elech begates al mavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Though I walk through a valley of deepest darkness, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Shivtecha mishantecha hema yenahamuni. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. God in Psalm 23 is likened to a shepherd, but that doesn't mean that we are to be passive. To be led and to lead are not mutually exclusive. That's a false choice. To be a Jew is to be a super sheep. Holy sheep. Why does our Parsha go on to talk about specific ethical behavior, like not putting a stumbling block in front of the blind, like not cursing the deaf? Because the deaf, observe the rabbis, can't hear you curse them. But the Torah still tells us, lo tikalel cheresh, do not curse the deaf, because you know who does hear it when you do? You do. Others might. Holy is as holy does. The name Kadosh Baruch Hu means both the Holy One who is blessed, who contains blessing, and also the one who bestows blessing. To live a life of holiness, I think I've come to realize about this passage, is to sit in that paradox of being as God without being what God is. To be as God is without being what God is to be a font of blessing in the world. That's why when Abraham, the first Jew, encounters God for the very first time, God says, Ve'escha legoy gadol, ve'avarechacha v'agadla shemecha. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. God promises to make us great through the blessings that we'll receive, the mitzvot that we'll follow, the guidance that we'll get. But that is not enough. Remember, we Jews are super sheep. So the Holy One continues, Ve'yeh bracha. Be a blessing. Be a blessing. Be different. Be distinctive. In a world of sheep, be better sheep. Be a mensch. Be a make-believe peasant, if that's what it takes. But most of all, be holy. Because I, God, am holy. And you Jews traveling on with your flock have miles to go before you sleep. Shabbat shalom.